Think back to a time in the mid-90s when the console wars were at their prime. You had Nintendo and Sega duking it out in the early 90s with the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Then, from out of the blue, a new console came forth and rocked our worlds.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
Yep, it's the Sony PlayStation. Even though the system was only 32-bit in graphics, it showed what gaming would eventually turn into alongside the Nintendo 64. I'll be taking a look at my favorite games from the Sony's original PlayStation system. So, now for the rules. Only one game per franchise, only games I've played can be on this list, and only games that were made for the PS1 originally can be on this list. So if a game was made for both the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation at the same time, I can't put it on here. However, if a game was made for the PS1 and then later ported or re-released for another system later down the road, I'll still count it.
What's wrong with these people? Never see a Bandicoot before?
This is Crow of Murder 15's Top 10 PS1 Games. Okay, don't turn off the video. I know Metal Gear Solid is praised as one of the best games of all time, but hear me out. I didn't really get into the Metal Gear series. That's not to say though that I didn't enjoy any of them, hence why Metal Gear Solid is even on the list. The story was great, there were plenty of twists and turns, including the infamous Psycho Mantis memory card read.
You like Castlevania, don't you?
And honestly, for PS1 graphics, not bad at all. Fun fact, and I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but did you know the original design for Solid Snake was a combination of Chuck Norris and Christopher Walken? Christopher frickin' Walken?
Hello.
Fighting games were all the rage in the mid-90s, and Tekken 3 was one of the kings. Sure, there were other 3D fighting games at the time like Virtua Fighter, but Tekken took this to a whole new level. Plenty of characters, awesome music, and pretty good gameplay. It didn't rely on special moves, rather how to string your combos together for the most damage. It took a lot more skill to get those combos put together just right. Or you could just be an asshole and pick Eddie Gordo.
And that sends you flipping through the air like Eddie Gordo from Tekken when someone doesn't know how to do combos and they're just hitting the buttons randomly.
Remember when the PlayStation first came out and the type of controller it had? Then a couple of years later, the now used DualShock controller was introduced and changed everything. You can thank Ape Escape for this. Ape Escape utilized the way the DualShock control was used. Normally, in an action platformer, you would use the main 4 buttons to jump, attack, and whatever else. Here, you would assign your weapon or tool to a button and then use the right analog stick to actually use it. It sounds complicated, but it really worked for the layout of the game. It was a very charming game with some of the funniest voice acting in a PS1 game, even giving Mega Man 8 a run for its money.
Monkey!
Now technically I'm breaking my own rule here because Resident Evil 2 was also released on the Nintendo 64 around the same time, but man, I could not pass putting this game up on the list! Resident Evil 1 was a great start, but was a little too heavy on puzzle solving. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was also good, but a little too heavy on the combat. Resident Evil 2 was the perfect blend of these two, plus you gotta run through different campaigns with Claire Redfield and the fan favorite Leon Kennedy. And now Capcom has announced that they're going to be making a Resident Evil 2 remake that's going to be coming out the beginning of 2019. Time to prep up for those zombie hordes again.
Jesus Christ.
Okay, flame shields up! Final Fantasy VII was a complete marvel, the first 3D Final Fantasy game to give us a great story, fantastic gameplay, and memorable characters that are still talked about today. However, Final Fantasy VII is not my favorite. From the PS1 era, that would be Final Fantasy IX. Pretty standard story, excellent gameplay, fantastic cast of characters, and in my opinion cemented how black mages are supposed to look with Vivi. Yes, I know technically that they had this look in earlier games as well, but just look at them! The battle system was pretty easy to understand as well. Not to mention Zidane is one of my favorite Final Fantasy protagonists. Much better than the next one we got. I'm sure a lot of you have probably never heard of this series, but it was a sleeper hit around the late 90s. Oddworld Abe's Odyssey was a puzzle platformer that required you to talk to Abe's friends and guide them to safety. Then Abe's Exodus comes along and ramped up the gameplay tenfold. Beautiful environments, complex gameplay elements, and let's be honest, it was pretty damn funny.
Oh, my name ain't Dripping. I knew that. I knew that.
Interestingly enough, Abe's Exodus was not the game it was supposed to be. The development team was only given 9 months to create this sequel, so a lot of new ideas had to be scrapped. Man, if they were this good making a game in only 9 months, imagine what they could do with a remake. Oh wait! You knew Crash had to be somewhere on this list. Come on guys, he's one of the frickin' mascots of PlayStation. Out of the original trilogy though, my personal favorite is Crash 3 Warped. Think of Crash 3 like Mario Bros. 3 for a moment. Crash 1 and Mario 1 were good games to start off their own franchises, and then when the third game came around for each franchise, they got the formula perfect. Crash 3 brought new power-ups, villains, level designs, and new hidden areas. Now, I highly recommend that if you want to play Crash 3 to check out the Crash Insane Trilogy version of it. Not saying that the old version is bad, but the way that this game handles the controls is a lot better.
Old and busted, new hotness.
Wait a minute, didn't I use this joke in a past top 10?
No one cares!
I didn't get to go in a lot of great detail during my top 20 games of all time video for this game, so let's take a closer look at Brave Fencer Musashi. Yes, I went over the basic plot, but I didn't really go into why I love this game so much. It reminds me a lot of Legend of Zelda with the exploration elements. The voice acting was pretty spot on, and the music! If you take anything away from this game that is positive, it is definitely the music. There's tons to explore, plenty of side quests to help make you stronger, and loads of different powers to use. Now that I think about it, the ability to take enemy powers kind of rolls into my number 2 pick. It was a tough choice to put this as my number 1 or number 2, but one game just happened to beat it out. So, Mega Man X4. What can I say about this game that I already haven't said in a previous top 10 countdown? What? I've only talked about this game once? Oh, okay. Well, this is one of the first PS1 games I had ever played and absolutely loved it, where I had played the previous Mega Man X games. The armor upgrades were a huge plus considering that you had the choice of 2 Buster upgrades. You either had a huge charge shot that left behind an electrical field that could damage enemies, or 4 fully charged shots that you could fire off one after another, similar to Mega Man X2. But as previously stated in another top 10 countdown, the main selling point of this game for me was the ability to play as Zero through a whole campaign. The story also focused more on Zero, showing a bit more of his backstory. Now, if we could only forget about his puss-out moment and the very bad voice acting during one particular scene.
What am I fighting for?
I don't think any Castlevania game will ever be able to top Symphony of the Night. Yes, the classics are great and the newer 3D ones are... But Symphony of the Night was a breath of fresh air when it came to the series. It borrowed elements from previous Castlevania games, specifically 2 and 3, and meshed it together with a beautiful art style and story. Yes, you technically have to fight Dracula again in this game, but considering you're playing as his son Alucard, there feels like there's a bit more at stake. Not to mention fighting against Richter, your former partners from Castlevania 2, Death himself, and a slew of other great boss fights. While it did suffer a bit from the giant landscape like Castlevania 2 and trying to remember where to go next, there were plenty of save points along the way that could also heal you back to full health, that were also strategically placed. While the Castlevania series hasn't seen a new release for quite some time, I'll always come back to this marvel of a game. And that's why Castlevania Symphony of the Night is my #1 PS1 game. I'm Crow of Murder 15, and now I'm gonna sit back and wait for the next season of the Castlevania anime to come out on Netflix.